Hello everyone and welcome to the Scrappy Spring Sew Along. Over the course of the next 8 weeks, we are going to be working together to create a library nook quilt. So let me show you mine. This is my first version, right here. So this is a free pattern on my website. So I'm actually going to put a link below to a copy of the pattern if you don't already have one. But it's made up of two different types of blocks. You'll see here this is the 9-patch block, and then there's also an English paper pieced hexagon flower kind of sprinkled throughout. So this is a beginner friendly pattern. My goal is to have video tutorials for you, if not every week, almost every week, to make this super easy. My goal is for you to succeed in making this quilt, even if you've never quilted before. So before we kind of jump into week 1, which is talking about sorting your scraps, cutting your scraps, before we do that, I want to just go over a few tools that I use that are certainly not required, but that may help make this quilt a little bit easier and a little bit faster to make. So let me show you what I've got. Okay, so first up is starch. So I'm a big fan of starching all my fabrics, but especially with a scrappy quilt. So if your scraps look anything like mine, I'll show you my scrap bins. I mean, the fabrics are just like wrinkled. It's a mess. So what I like to do is I will take my scraps out, I will soak them with Best Press. So that's the starch brand that I like to use, but I will soak them with starch, let them dry, and then give them a good press. And look at this. So these scraps actually came out of this bin right here. They're all perfectly flat. The starch does make your fabrics stiffer, which makes them easier to sew. And then when you put your quilt in the wash and it washes out the starch, it goes back to that really soft, nice texture. So I'm definitely would recommend starching, at the very least, any scrap quilts that you make. So start with Best Press is the brand that I use. You can use any brand of starch that you like. I'll include a link to the Best Press that I like below. This one is Linen Fresh, but you can buy unscented or scentless Best Press as well. Next up, my Stripology ruler. So this is a little bit more of an investment and it's definitely not required, but it certainly makes your cutting so much faster. So while the quilt that we're making looks like it's made out of a bunch of squares, it's actually made from strips of fabric. And cutting along these lines, you can just cut at the exact intervals that you need, and it makes the most precise and accurate cuts. You will see me using this ruler throughout the whole sew along. If you don't have one, you can certainly make do with other rulers, but this is like by far my go-to ruler for almost every quilt that I make. Again, links will all be to everything below. The only thing that I will say that you actually do need for this sew along are 1-inch hexagon templates. You can make your own. I find it pretty much more economical to just buy them. These I think are from Amazon, but you can find them in any kind of craft store. 1-inch hexagon templates, and we'll talk about this later in the sew along. Probably, I think in week 3 we'll touch on this. Okay. Oh, and if you are interested in making your hexy flowers have some kind of like fussy cutting, or if you want to, if you see in here, if you want to have a specific print on your fabric really highlighted in the center of your hexagon, this is a fussy cutting 1-inch hexagon ruler that I've used before. I'll put a link to it below, but you basically just put it right over your fabric and it makes it easier to see what is going to be shown on your hexagon when you sew it. Okay, oh, and one last thing. We'll talk more about these probably next week, but I am a huge fan of these fork pins, and I find that they make sewing the 9-patch quilts so smooth and so easy. So you'll just have to trust me on this one if you want to go ahead and buy them, or if you want to wait till next week and see how I use them, but they're called fork pins, and I'll link those below as well. Okay, so that should cover all of the materials or tools that you'll need for this whole quilt along. Again, none of those things are required, except for maybe the templates. You'll need to have those somehow, but other than that, you should be ready to go. Okay, so this week we are cutting and sorting all of our scraps. So I mentioned I am making my quilt pink and green and then white as kind of like my background. So the white fabrics or the low volume fabrics are going to serve as my light colored fabrics, and the pink and the green are going to serve as my dark colored fabrics. So once I went ahead and pulled all my scraps, I used Best Press. I starched them until they were soaking. I let them dry overnight. Then I took a really hot iron and I pressed them, and it makes them super thick but also super flat, wrinkle-free. And I love that. So I do recommend starching. It's not, again, not required, but I do recommend it. The next thing you need to do is you need to cut them into strips. And so you need 111 strips of your light colored fabric and 111 strips of your dark colored fabric. So I went right ahead and I cut 111 low volume. Like some of them are super low volume, some of them are a little bit more colorful. But as you make this quilt, because it's going to be so scrappy, those variations just blend right in. And then what I did is I think I cut 60 of each, 60 green and 60 pink strips. I know that's more than 111, but as I'm getting to those final steps in my quilt and I'm like laying it out, sometimes I think, oh, I think I need a little bit more pink here, or needs a little bit more green here. And if I have those strips already cut, it's just so much easier to go ahead and make that 9 patch rather than having to go back and sort through my scrap bins and start over from square one. So I cut a few extra of my colorful fabrics just for placement purposes. Okay, so then the only other thing you need to decide this week, as I mentioned before, is if you want your quilt to be what I called organized scrappy, or if you want your quilt to be like totally scrappy. So if you want your quilt to be more organized scrappy, where the fabrics are kind of grouped together, then what you'll need to do when you're cutting is, as you're cutting these strips, you will need to cut your strips in groups of 3 or in multiples of 3. So what I mean by that is when I cut the scraps for this fabric, I cut 3 strips of the exact same fabric. This fabric I had more of. I think I was able to cut 6 strips. So whether you cut 3 strips, 6 strips, 9 strips, however many strips you want to cut, it just needs to be a multiple of 3, because when you're sewing your 9 patches, it's going to be 3 rows, and then we're going to cut them, and we'll get into that next week. So for this week, just know that if you want yours to be a little bit more organized, you need to cut them in multiples of 3. And that same goes for your light colored fabrics as well, all of your dark colored fabrics. If you want your quilt to be totally scrappy, where it's just all the different colors and fabrics are mixed in, which I think can look really nice as well, then it doesn't matter how many strips you cut. You just need 111 of each, and whatever scraps you have, you can use. Okay, so this week, that is your job. You're gonna go ahead. I recommend starching your fabrics. You're gonna sort through your light fabrics and your dark fabrics, pick what colors you wanna see in your quilt, starch them, and then cut them into strips. And then next week, we will kind of hit the ground running with some of our sewing. As you're looking through your cutting instructions, you will see that there are a few other pieces that you need to cut that are not the strips, and those are going to belong to these blocks here. So when you are cutting those pieces, the bigger squares, I'm finding a good one here, the bigger squares are going to serve as your background, and then the small, I think they're 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares, but I'd have to double check. Those are going to serve as the different petals and centers for your hexes. If you aren't quite ready to decide what fabrics you want to put in your hexagons, you can totally hold off on doing those. I don't starch my fabrics that I use for English paper piecing. I would still starch the background fabric, so maybe you want to pick those out, but you can definitely hold off on any English paper piecing if you're not comfortable until we discuss that. I think that's going to be in week 3. Okay, so that is everything you need for week 1. I am so excited to get started making this quilt with you next week. And please come back, join us again next week, join me again next week, and make sure you're checking your email if you are a part of the Sew Along for links and tips and keeping us connected. All right, thank you so much.